We are thrilled that Professor Stephen Holgate will teach two lecture seminars on Hegel's Science of Logic.
Yeah, they're charging for it, so I didn't sign up. I own the books. I need to read the books. I haven't really read
I
as
see.
extensively as I should have.
How bad is that cost? Oh, 250, I guess, is a lot more what I expect for that. So that's not terrible. Just,
Yeah,
it is a lot for us.
yeah. I don't know how we would like share it if we like went in and bought a third and then had access to the videos, maybe. But then
I mean,
again,
I know how to deal with stuff, but we're online, so
I, I'm I'm still of the opinion that okay, he wrote the book that he's going to teach. At least you and me have the book. I don't know if Jim does. I say book, it's books, the two volumes.
They had them in PDF form.
Yeah. Yeah, we all have it at least in PDF.
all right. So I think we just skipped straight to electricity, or are we continuing from here?
Whichever you want to do.
No,
You,
you're already into it. So we had to go
you
back up to 220.
okay. Yep. I think I read this last time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't.
So tell us about um just sort of an extended discussion on your take of Hegel's understanding of electricity.
I mean, yeah, because a lot of what I got was more of its time where they were able to show, oh, you can rub like with different types of things. You can, it was, which was static electricity at the time. You can rub it, you can get positive electricity or negative electricity, which has different properties, different, that when it's discharged had a different color and a different pattern, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll kind of have this sort of dialectical kind of view at that point. There's this positive electricity and this negative electricity that can exist. And I mean, even if you denote that to what we know today, which is positive, with it's more electrical charge, and negative is a lot more electrons, and positive is a dearth of electrons. It still ultimately ends up being the same thing, where we have here of a kind of there are two bodies that are only defined by their opposite in this process, the positive and negative, which is going to be the nucleus and the electron, that themselves exist as a sort of tension, which, as we kind of think about at this point, there's this sort of like, it does remind me back of cohesion of identity, which we had earlier as in terms of sound and heat, where we get this sort of tension that exists because we're getting this sort of kind of movement away or perturbation away from equilibrium, and
Mm.
eventually that does discharge that has wants to correct itself because it's the attraction of opposites. Which again, we think we kind of remember that from the logic. Uh,
I like how he writes this. The bodies have their selfhood as their light, but as a light which is pregnant with difference, and the difference being, the positive and the negative internal electricity. You know, we of course we of course have a similar understanding today, only this is much more schematic, I
Yep.
guess you could say.
Um, what I was trying to remember, I guess the one thing that really did annoy me about this section, because again, they didn't understand at the time, I'm he does complain about yet again them trying to create this sort of material that is electricity, like everything else they were doing in this time, as just a sort of generic kind of proper matter that doesn't interact except under electricity. Um, but one thing that did get me is he said, "Well, how does electricity explain, in the thunderstorm if moisture discharges electricity?" And I'm like, "It's that moisture that disperses the charge." But okay,
Yeah.
that's just sort of the yet again the he didn't they didn't know that water was has its electromagnetic property
Mm-hmm.
because
It's a conductor.
it's a conductor, yeah, which is why it discharges so well.
Yeah.
But when it's all kind of dispersed out into droplets, they're not going to connect. Uh,
Although there's got to be like an ambient electricity in water. Uh, and it makes me wonder how it. This is totally a question for me, like how it would interact with life in the sea to make. I don't know. It almost sounds like magic. Like, what if you took all of the ambient electricity out of the water? Would the sea life all die off? I think the answer would be a yes, but I don't know if anyone's ever
I mean,
looked
the,
into
the
that.
the magnetic moment of the water molecule. That's what you mean, or
So
just
like
the electricity that propagates through the water.
more like the electricity that propagates through the water. I'm not talking about like a
Yeah.
lightning strike on the water, because a lightning strike on the water would obviously kill fish or whatever's on the surface, or at least extremely damage it, but like
Mhm.
low level electrical charge that exists in sea life and us. And I mean, it's there, right? And so the air is a conductor of it, and so is water. Anyway, I
That's
don't know
fine.
where I don't know where I'm going with that.
No, that's fine. Well, we got it kind of down in some manner.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, just trying to get. Oh, that's right. And some of it in my other book too. Well, I went through the Zeus Aster trying to find some interesting aspects there as well. The first part, which this kind of goes over how it ends up having me these physical two things that are kind of together that make electricity implication, which again we know what that means today. Um, Figure we could always skip down to 324 as well. In oh, in mechanical contact, the physical difference of one body is posited in the other. As the bodies at the same time remain mechanically independent of each other, the difference is a tension of the bodies in their mutual opposition. This tension consequently does not involve physical nature of the body and its concrete determinants. Individuality is manifested and involved in the process only as reality of the abstract self, as light or identity, as a light pregnant with opposition. So an identity of identity difference in that way. The other moment of this superficial process, the removal of the diremption, or I guess the unity of opposites, has its product undifferentiated identity, which being incorporeal immediately vanishes apart from this abstract physical manifestation. The only other significant outcome of the process is mechanical effort of shock, which, yeah, I guess to read that in a empirical sense of how we think about of how we know of electricity, that's when you kind of start separating the charge out to a point to where it can no longer hold apart, or the capacitance of air is it goes above the capacitance of air and discharges back to an equilibrium. So you don't really get to know electricity exists until it basically builds up to the point you can see it through the discharge of static electricity.
Right.
What he's saying here.
Mm-hmm.
And of
Yeah.
course, at this time, they only knew about the rubbing of substances. So there's a lot of kind of the rubbing between bodies in here that keeps going along, which again still works even from the perspective of the transfer of electron leading up to charge. What was it? Oh, he didn't talk. What was it? That's the part I still didn't get though. Is let me see here. Yeah, the difficulty is in the second place the general one of the notion as such, or the notion of electricity. The difficulty of grasping light in its relationship as moments of a totality, and here no longer in freedom as solar light, but as moment of a particular body. Again, I guess sort of a recoming to of an actual incidence of light, not that we're used to in just general like identity of light, metaphysically. Where is it? And then he gets to a lot of stuff, the vitreous and Ricinius electricity, which I guess I didn't get a chance to look into that, which I guess we can, but I'm sure it's extremely historical at this point.
Mm.
Because actually, I think it's still important to bring up, though. Yeah, the fluid theory of electricity.
Hmm.
So this is again the same thing where he complains about, where it's like this sort of there's this like there's the fluid of heat or of caloric, the fluid of combustion, etc. So there's a fluid concept of electricity that was thought at the time. And again, he comes in to criticize that. So that's why it's important,
Mm-hmm.
like a little bit important to kind of that he does bring that up. Yeah, Vitruvius and Ricinius electricity, which led me to this. The two fluid theory of electricity. And then Benjamin Franklin had a one fluid theory,
Yeah.
which I mean, it kind of makes sense in a sense that it does flow, it's just not a fluid.
Yeah.
And the one fluid theory kind of does fit closer with the electron flow. So I'm going to guess that's in a sense positive and negative electricity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Vitreous electricity
when
is a historical term for the positive electrical charge created by rubbing materials like glass. While resonance electricity was negative charge from rubbing amber. Those terms come from Charles Dufay in the 1730s.
because Vitruvius is referencing to glass. Okay.
Yeah.
And so
So that's
Rutilius
where
is
they get, yeah, that's where
amber.
they get the idea of positive versus negative electricity. And Ben Franklin was the one who you brought in the terms positive and negative.
Something that made a lot more sense, yeah.
Yeah,
And eventually he collapsed into one. He just chose the wrong one,
yeah,
which is why we had the opposite example of positive charge movement in electronics these days.
and of course Ben Franklin was the one to develop the idea that thunder and lightning were electrical phenomena, which Hegel mentions, and
Rejects. Yeah,
yeah,
but
Hegel doesn't like that too much,
well, there
even though
was
we
enough.
know Franklin was right about that.
Yeah, just like when it came to Newton, there's the kind of thing where the examples were insufficient or the reasoning was wrong, but ended up being right nonetheless in
Yeah,
the long run. At least I'm sure Franklin was a lot closer than Newton was, because as I seem to go through Hegel's review of Newton, I see a lot more mysticism in Newton. So
yeah. I mean, a lot of Hegel's criticisms of Newton were correct, but
yeah. In here, 223. Oh, that's right. He does at some point talk about the shining of light, which is the inner becoming the outer through you know, through the expression of electricity. So just kind of a throwback to that, because he does at some point call back to the logic itself. Or was that paragraph 90 something he referenced? I just forgot about that. But then again, a lot of this does tend to also go through the back and forth of his era, so I'm trying to find something a little more on point of what we want from this. How does he? Okay, something I need to find again is how he corresponds magnetism with respect to electricity. 'Cause I think it's magnetism is a one body with two properties, but electricity is basically two bodies with their own individual properties through themselves that which is much more concrete than just sort of the way magnetism was. The electrical relationship is activity, right? By the way, you have any questions so far, Matt? Or did he have to go deal with? Oh, I'm sure he did have to go deal with something. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Uh,
Hegel lived at a time when physics was moving from a concern with this static electricity to non-static electricity.
yeah.
He does reference, I think he does reference Galvano and Ampere as well. So it was with Ampere he started talking about
Gare.
relationship between electricity and magnetism, which would later be developed by Faraday, and it leads us to Maxwell. But that Maxwell is several decades after Hegel's time.
Yeah, but what is it right here? Thus, the body shows its physical show as light, whereas solar light is immediate and free. This light is rather called forth by the power of another body. Just light, then, in this case, is a mode of existence of bodies opposed to each other. This tense light has the urge to differentiate itself upon the other body, which, I guess, in a sense of what the very early metaphysical sense of light just sort of is shining constantly, while here it only exists in the moment of equalization. And like the part where it talks about where electricity smells, when it's like, yeah, that would be just as ozone.
Yeah.
I think the part here, like I said, that got me here is as a for how can clouds rub against one another, being at least as softer than a sponge? And I'm like, ice crystals, which is why you need a certain height of a storm before it becomes a thunderstorm. Although I do find it interesting that it seems like the Earth's surface has a very common net negative charge just because of friction and such. But yeah, this is like meteorology was extremely primitive at this time, which is funny because I think it only came into its own as we know it today just because of computers in the 90s. It must, oh, where is it? The essential point here is that what is active is body's own immanent physical refractorness. It must be observed in this connection that what at first was an immediate determination is now a posited one. Welcome back.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah,
I've been holding it for a while. Had to go to the bathroom.
no worries.
So where were we? You have control of
Um,
the screen, right? You're
yeah,
good?
yeah, I kind of jumped to where we're at. The essential point here is that what is active is body's. I think we're getting kind of something a little past. Like I was complaining because Hegel was because I know how the general theory of lightning these days,
Mm-hmm.
modern wise, and so this section kind of hurt for a little bit. Where how can clouds rub against one another, being at least softer than a sponge? And I'm like, well, that's why at a certain point the storm gets high enough, the rain becomes ice crystals, and that's where the rubbing happens.
Right.
And that's yeah,
Right. There's a certain consistency higher in the atmosphere that allows things to happen that,
yeah.
yeah,
Literally because it's not liquid because it's solid. They're able to rub against each other,
right.
which is why you don't get very any thunderstorms in low base rain.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Which is why when you go up mountain climbing and whatnot, you run into those conditions that you would never at sea level.
Well, I think yeah, especially when it gets forced up the mountains, it
Yeah.
gets cooled very quickly.
Yeah. And that mechanical energy does things that, yeah.
The essential point here is that what is active is body's own immanent physical refractorness. It must be observed in this connection that what at first was an immediate determination is now a positive one. I'm trying to think. Is that it is not only we who compare bodies, they themselves compare themselves, doing so preserve their physical nature. It is beginning of organic being, which likewise preserves itself against the means of nutrition. Yeah, so essentially it's a moment where the bodies preserve themselves through the interaction. That's what it is versus cohesion of identity. Like I'm specifically calling it cohesion of difference versus cohesion of identity because I think that's a more proper kind of shorthand for what we're dealing with here.
Hmm.
So
I
just
should,
it's go ahead.
I should have been taking notes on this from the beginning, but I haven't really been. Have you been sort of jotting down things?
Yeah, that's why I usually have a pencil with my book or my digital copy.
Yeah. I was
Um,
going to say, by the time we're done with this, I'd love to read your notes because I want to read through it again with the notes.
I'll
Uh,
see what I can do. They're pretty not not the a lot of it, but I'm but yeah, so I think that like I said, the cohesion of difference here is because it's the things that makes cohesion work versus just being cohesion. Which is what makes shape shape. It's yeah, I guess that makes sense. We're definitely deep into the essence, so it's the actual activity of cohesion that's the most important here, which eventually will dissolve. Cohesion also can end, which is what chemistry is, which leads to chemistry. Uh, that's what I was understanding. So in a sense, even though they interact, the nucleus. I'm just calling it the nucleus because that's the bulk of what we care for positive at this level of cohesion because it's just the nucleus. So the nucleus and the
yeah.
of the electron here. Is that's essentially they still say themselves, except for the rare circumstance where it becomes a neutron, but that's just weird quantum stuff at that point. I mean, it just means it's irrelevant at this level. Um, shape. Yeah, so looking, I think there's a point also I've been trying to kind of think back on, so I'll just read it. Shape, namely as crystal, was immediately transparent, just as celestial bodies, but being self-subsistent, were immediately lights. Now, individual body is not immediately luminous, is not itself a light, since as shape it is not an abstract ideality. On the contrary, as an explicated and developed unity, it includes the determination of the celestial bodies as a property in its individuality. Again, okay, I think it's just describing bodies being what they are, also relative to another, through another. Immediately, therefore, it is only as the shining of an other in it, through it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, same thing. In the crystal, it is true, form has brought the difference of material being for self back to unity, but this unity of form in its determinations is still not physical ideality, but only immediately determined mechanical totality. Light, on the other hand, is physical ideality. The crystal, therefore, not being self-luminous, is this ideality only in principle, since it only manifests the latter only when reacting to another, but what the crystal is in itself, which must now be posited. Thus, this ideality, posited in developed totality, is no longer merely a shining of the body as visible in alien incident light, but the simple totality of the shining of the self in the face of another. That is to say, since the unity of form with itself is now posited, the crystal here constitutes itself a sun. The light which proceeds from it as a differentiated self only displays the crystal's totality in its peculiarity as a simple physical existence. And so again, this is electricity and it's in two bodies. And again, it's just two bodies who define itself through its other. A circular, uh, circular, again, I'm trying, I just read it. What the heck? It, it manifests itself through the other, and so reflects back upon itself, both the positive through the negative, negative through the positive. Okay.
So when he's talking about bodies,
Yeah.
um,
I keep wanting to project positive and negative onto this more than he probably could have. I'm trying to pull back.
yeah, because when he talks about bodies or two bodies interacting, um, he's just using that level of abstraction, like he's not talking about specific types of bodies, just any, you know, any bodies that are made of matter and are interacting at this level, right?
Right. Hmm.
Sorry if I pulled you off here.
No, that's fine. I was trying to go through it, process it anyway,
Yeah.
so that doesn't do anything but just help. So
Two
how does
bodies come into contact, especially when they're rubbed.
yeah.
Okay, so he's talking about static electricity
Yep.
Yeah,
there.
this is still the big focus of how he describes electricity here.
So how it manifests is very much phenomenological, like experiential. You know, you have, yeah,
What?
yeah, you know, you walk into the store, in your tennis shoes, your shoes rub on the floor, it creates static electricity. You know, you touch part of the aisle that's metal, zap, it
Yeah,
manifests.
not you say that. Where is it? There it is. The common and he's quoting Gaylor here.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
The commonness and at the same time most harmful consequence of the false supposition of causal relationships existing in isolation. Again, this is sort of the fluidic concept of electricity. a supposition imported without question into phenomenology has
Yeah.
received extreme in the case of electrical phenomena through the idea everywhere rampant of electricity as in a state of motion, as a current. Yeah, like it just sort of it's a current that always flows, therefore that's what this fluid is, rather than the other way around, where the current is induced by electricity.
Right.
It's a tautol. I think I marked this as reverse tautology
Yeah.
in my notes, or in my margin notes. In supposing that something which, in its true meaning, is only the first stirring of an incipient chemical process, it is an isolated, independent fluid something which persists through the flux of phenomena. One no longer thinks of following up the process as such in its further development, and of recognizing determinations which belong to it in their natural context. Instead of instead that which consists of veritable inner movements and dang it, oh sorry. Trying to look at the time and I lost where I was. It was something which was and of recognizing determination which belong to it their natural context, instead of which constitutes their veritable inner movement and development of the process itself is now, in accordance with said fixed idea, straightway placed under the empty schema of a merely external movement, again external instead of inherently internal, of said fictitious electric fluid and viewed as a current which, next to the manifestation in the original form of tension, is exclusively asserted to be a second species of activity of this fundamental electrical substrate. Yeah, so it's again taking something as as a, again another substance to be found because that's I guess how it started and they wanted to continue that just sort of was another hammer and everything else is a nail
Yeah.
that goes along, which again, as we understand now, this is literally the same thing as cohesion of matter right here, because this is what cohesion is electrical attraction. Yeah, so you brought up phenomenology. I'm like, yeah, here we go.
Yeah. Yeah, because like how we experience things and those things are structured. Um just the way he describes like the two bodies interacting and electricity being the result, it sounds very phenomenological, you know,
Mhm.
in its description, and it makes sense with the older way of looking at the process that somehow the two bodies rubbed and it created electricity versus electricity being present at all times, even if it's invisible. And yeah, you get me.
Yep. So it's again another kind of thing where, oh yeah, because in fact, what under phenomenology itself, when we're talking about force and understanding, literally magnetism is like one of the best examples of how it goes awry when you try to explain it using force, because it's
Yeah,
backwards essentially, or refers back to itself in this infinite co aspect that can't get out of itself. Electricity is the infinite form which is eminently differentiated and is the unity of these differences. Yeah. Again, negative what they call positive and negative electricity is just positive negative electrical charge. And then there's some examples again of how it seems to persist. Again, the what Jim called the high school teacher Hegel. Yeah, here an example of like how you char static charge and how you can connect all these things together and how the charge tends to change depending on how you connect them, depending on the size of the objects and such. Which I'm pretty sure I did something not too dissimilar into my high school and college physics.
Hmm.
Although it's definitely a lot more specialized because all this is actually explained at this point. Because I went to a physics post Maxwell. What is, oh yeah, that does remind me. I'm going to go back a little bit. He did try to mention how also they try to explain a lot of the meteorological processes to electricity.
Hmm.
Which I'm trying to understand, was that him just sort of them trying to explain lightning as electricity, which I'm sure he wouldn't have as much a concern with as if they're trying to explain a lot of natural phenomena as to electricity. It thus appears as an oh, I missed this part. Since this is not matter of propagation of things, it appears like magnetism to be in a whole. In both cases, activity appears to be very restricted in scope, for if magnetism is the peculiar property of iron to point north, this is where I mark geology. Electricity merely is the making of a spark, but this is met with everywhere, and that is all or almost all there is to it. Electricity thus appears as an occult agent, like the occult properties assumed by the scholastics. If it is present in thunderstorms, we do not see why it should be present elsewhere. But we must not think of such great natural as thunderstorms on the analogy of our chemical laboratories, blah blah blah, just failing to explain how lightning can is at the time explain can be explained as electrical buildup and
Yeah.
discharge. But yeah, it was this part right here. The electricity is seen as an occult, thus appears as an occult agent. Again, phenomenological.
Yeah. Thus, yeah. Thus appears. Yeah. Wait. Whoa,
Go
whoa, whoa,
back.
whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay. Oh, oh.
Okay, I
Sorry.
did get.
Like,
I think
all
I
right.
glanced over this and forgot to come how fun this was too. Okay.
So yeah, electricity thus appears as an occult agent, like the occult properties assumed by the scholastics. This reminds me of Marx's discussion of the commodity, and
Oh,
its its appearance. Oh God, hang on. Ah, trusty capital. Okay, so well,
wait.
so something like this appears in chapter. It's got to be chapter one.
Chapter
Um,
one, volume one.
yeah, where he um shit. I should know this
Okay.
like the back of my head, but it's been a while since I've gotten into it. So, um, grotesque ideas. Um, okay, so I mean, this isn't exactly what I'm looking for, but on the bottom of page 164 in capital, it says the mysterious character of the commodity form consists, therefore, simply in the fact that the commodity reflects the social characteristics of men's own labor as objective characteristics of the products of labor themselves as the socio-natural properties of these things. And you notice how he says socio-natural properties of these things, these commodities. It reminds me of how Hegel talks about the natural logical in this book. Like it's a like it's the dual both
Hmm.
it's the same thing we're talking about, but you have to look at it from those two perspectives in a dialectical frame, or it doesn't come into focus. Every critic of this book that we're reading, the for our audience, the um, um, Hegel's philosophy of nature. If you were at all familiar with Marx or Capital, uh, yeah, you should realize that Hegel and Marx share that in that the this the study of what they're looking at here is from two perspectives simultaneously, both in trying to nail down the reality or natural as well as the logical. In the case of Hegel and in the case of Marx, he's looking at the social system, the socio part of the socio natural. And yeah, so wow, I didn't even think I'd find that. Yeah, okay. Socio natural properties, logico natural properties in this book. And as far as what I was talking about earlier, the occult, um, oh, we can keep going. I'll find the quote later. I
Yeah,
need to
but
I need
as
to
you're
reread this
saying,
chapter. But yeah, the commodities commodities and the way that they interact appear as occult uh things that have a life of their own. They're
Yep.
vampiric, right? They suck the life out of uh people. You know, you give things the properties of men by turning the socio-natural on its head.
oh my, I
And
just
that's the phenomenological view of capital, right? You take the socio natural and you turn it around as if the commodity is the living thing and the people are the objects.
I'm just thinking about, is there something we can consider in capital that would be the equivalent to like a fluid? It almost feels like what money is at this point. Just sort
Uh,
of like this fluid property that just flows through the economy. That just sort of is its own thing and
yeah,
penetrates.
yeah, yeah. Well, capital flows is something David Harvey talks about in
Yeah.
his books on capital. Um, I think I think I'm not
It's
going to say he misses the mark, but I like the way his language talks about the way that capital. I mean, like especially in volume three, you watch capital morph itself into different forms as it flows into different parts of the economy, whether it's the individual or the production sector, the financial sector, and what those shapes look like. Like the first three chapters for us in Capital Volume 1 detail an awful lot of different forms that capital shows up in, whether it's hordes or whether it's credit, finance, capital. Chapter 3 gets into the shape. Um, uh, yeah, money or the circulation of commodities. So money and commodities, same thing, different form depending on where it is, right? In the flow of capital. And during the circulation, you know, whether it's in your wallet or it's in the cloud or whether it's, you know, as they say, all tied up in um, inventory or in all of the houses that you've invested in, right? You know, if you're like a real estate person, or if all of it is on stock in stock on container ships going from one part of the world to another, right? If you think of that socio-natural object as having a flow on its own, that's the best I got. It flows from one shape to another. As far as liquid, okay, I'll shut up. Um, reflection is accustomed thinking. Ah, of the individual body as something dead. Yes, which has only external mechanical contacts or chemical relationships with other bodies. It's very phenomenological. The expression of this theory regards body as merely a sponge which lets such matter circulate within it, since body remains what it is, merely taking in more or less of this matter. This would so basically when you're taking the non-dialectical version of science, you have to shift from one perspective to another. From one perspective, the body is at the forefront, the electricity is in the background. From another, you sort of think of the body as given as something dead and you focus on the electricity. And Hegel, I think, here is saying Yeah, you can't have one without the other.
Right.
Um,
There are moments of singular viewpoints of the same thing that lead to a full picture, right? They're all
right.
moments.
You have to be dialectical.
Yeah.
Sorry. And it's
Yeah.
dialectical all the way down, which is very confusing to think about because there are different levels of abstraction.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's spectrum both like equal distant one way, then you have spectrum in this way, and there's this whole dimensional, yeah.
Yeah.
I think since we got a little bit of time left, I think that was the bulk of this. I just kind of want to, unless you have anything
Yeah.
else to talk about, Matt.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think for the most part, like I said, it just continues to go further into the same thing. Just sort of
Ooh, this
like
is cool. So,
same,
as regards the effects of electricity, these are shown principally in the removal of the tension.
just
Um,
the
so
discharge. Yeah.
the discharge. And so the tension is removed, the electricity does not disappear. Although to our eyes, it appears and disappears. All we can really see is that removal of tension, and it's usually whip
Hmm.
crack, you know.
Yep. Return to equilibrium.
Hmm. Yeah, fascinating.
Gosh, I think it's just a slight tangent. I keep thinking about in fluid dynamics, the fun little confusion of the term gravity waves, which is not gravitational waves. It's
Mm,
gravity as an external influence that leads to that kind of oscillation that kind of happened in fluid dynamics, where it overshoots and then goes back down. That's because gravity is part of the equation.
hmm.
And that was before gravitational waves was even possible, possibly thought.
Don't have
Yeah, and he's
gravitational
talking about
waves until Einstein's general
space time.
general theory of relativity.
Yep. The full unity of space time and not just abstract under Hegel. All right, at least this section is pretty short. That I can actually get it all into one view. All right. Um, but I just want to check that. Loss of abstract. Yeah, again, it's just the effect of electricity can just as well be produced by mechanical. It's where I think it's kind of interesting. So I'm trying to see if that means too much. The chemical side, we're basically talking electrical pistol, where they take hydrogen and oxygen together, and through an electrical spark generate water, which is a I get what do they call that? Water welding is what that I think is sometimes called because it's using the spark that creates water as a welding source. The chemical side electric process is, and then of course the reverse, the chemical side is the electrolysis of water. As it is not the individuality of the body which enters into tension, electrical action can only produce a physical result in the element of abstract neutrality, water. It has the power of decomposing water into hydrogen and oxygen, though we already know that these are not the ingredients of water, but only the abstract forms in which water is manifested. And then galvanic, I can only think it's galvanization, which is where you use. I still don't know what galvanic is at this point because that's all I know about galvanization is about electrical potential that coats one metal with another. I'm guessing that's still what that's talking about here.
In Galvano,
Yeah.
really developed the first electric batteries.
Oh, the zinc copper battery.
Yeah,
Okay.
because in copper and well, I think he first did it in saline solution, and later he did it with acidic solutions. It's
Okay. That makes a lot more sense. I played with one of those as a kid as a science project.
That was the kind of thing actually inspired Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because Galvano and other people did experiments using electricity to excite muscle tension. You
Yeah,
cause take muscles like a frog or any animal, you know, apply electricity to it, and the muscle would contract.
yeah, showing bioelectricity is a thing, although it's not separately a thing.
Yeah,
It's just a
I've I haven't read Frankenstein myself,
yeah.
but
it
my,
was
my
yeah, it was speculation based on the science of that early 19th century.
my impression was that the common, I guess, common knowledge of electricity back then was that it was akin more to magic
Yep.
and that its properties could do more than
Reanimation, yeah.
than is actually possible.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and say reanimation isn't possible at some future date, maybe, but I think reanimation or animation itself probably only happens with our technology at microscopic levels at this point, if it does at all. You know, and you know, and we've seen that you can resuscitate organs that have stopped recently. But as far as doing the full, you know, Rocky Horror Picture Show version of reanimating life, you know, that's
I mean, the closest thing we got to that is cardio version, which is, the paddles or whatever to the chest.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You know,
That's
and
just restarting the heart.
yeah, and it has to be done within a certain period of time,
Yeah.
or you know, the matter starts to break down without the electricity in it, which is quite interesting to me. Like, so the cells organized at that level, like, if you could just get them to continue, as long as the electricity's there, you would live forever. And I'm thinking about the DS9 like excitation machine that some guy made. You know what I'm talking about?
Been a
It,
while.
yeah, it it's a DS9 episode, and the guy is a conspiracy theorist, and he's made this pod that if you get into it, it will reanimate your cells or something to make them able to keep you going forever.
Yeah, I'll have to find it. It's been a
I have
long
no idea.
time.
Yeah, you'd have to watch it. Uh,
Um, Figured since we got a brief moment, we can probably go over the last section here. Because it's actually all on screen. The particularization of the individual body does not stop at an inert diversity of properties and their own separate activities, from which, in the electrical process, the abstract pure selfhood of body, the light principle or self-identity first issues in the tension of opposed moments and the resolves the latter in their indifference. Since the particular properties are only the reality of the simple notion, the body of their soul, of light, and since the complex of the properties, the particular body is not truly independent, the entire corporeality therefore enters into tension, into a process which at the same time the becoming of the individual body's shape, which at first only proceeded from the notion and therefore was posited only in principle, now issues from an existent process and presents itself as the posited outcome of an existence, the chemical process. We begin with shape in the immediate form, and its necessity has been ascertained from the notion, but shape must in the end also display itself as existing, as the outcome of a process. Body as immediate presupposes a real chemical process. Yeah, that's the backwards. Yeah, versus posited. Parents are thus the
yeah.
mediate from which one begins, but as regards to their existence, they too are characterized as posited. Shape, in conformity with its notion, passes into this third stage, but this is rather the first from which what was previously the first
First proceed.
proceeds.
Yeah.
This is found, yeah, it's kind of like it's because you're going both directions. Why that makes sense. This is founded in the deeper logical advance. Particularization does not stop at the moment of difference as a tension of abstract selfhood. Body is particular is not independent nor self-subsistent, but a link in a chain in relation to what is other. Yeah, again, just what we saw from the logic, but physical. This is the omnipotence of the notion which we already saw in the electrical process, in this excitation of a body by another.
Mm.
It is the only abstract selfhood of the bodies which comes into play and is manifest. But the process must become a real process of the bodily determinations. The whole corporeality entering into the process. The relativity of body must be manifest. And this manifestation is the alteration of body in the chemical process. So how the body comes about fully, not just sort of it's there.
Yeah.
And then the chemical process.
Yep.
Chemistry again.
Yeah, and actually 325 like n- that whole backwards picture, I totally get it because he's working from the abstract to the concrete through the entire thing, and so you read it and it almost seems like you get to yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. The the way it reads. 325 what you just read. Yeah.
Oh, we actually get to read about galvanism in like what he's used by it, which yeah, it is what I knew it to be. Okay.
Okay. Galvanic skin response. We
Oh,
always talk about
there's
that on Voyager.
another long Zusatz here, but it's not as long as I thought it was for a second because there's like two longish ones. Okay.
Okay.
So the chemical process, which continues up until galvanization, so there's 232 at the least as a starting point. So
Yeah. So 232, we take it down to uh can we get to the 232? Hmm.
I mean, we could possibly say uh, preliminary
Y-
go to 244 because that's the start of the next like major section
Yeah.
or subsection. Like, I
Yeah, 232 to 244 I think would
it's
be a good stretch.
yeah, because
Two Zuzatzes talks about, it talks about what we were talking about with the chemical yeah, the whole chemical process up
yeah,
to
this
galvanization.
is the entire introduction to the whole section, basically.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Great. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks,
All
Jim.
right.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Comrades, have a great one.
You too.